maybe even try to connect all of these dots of forest by building green corridors. But yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, thanks guys.
Thanks. It's such an amazing vision that's already happening in Mātai Moana. Many people are probably not aware of the work that's got on there and what an amazing treasure and Taonga is developing in the whole area up there with wildlife and with native plants. And that's the sort of vision that a lot of us and a lot of people in Wellington have for the future of the peninsula. So I'd like to just quickly move on. Just two more people to speak. I'd like to move on now to focus a little bit on Shelley Bay. As you all know, this has been a highly contentious area. The bulldozers are all there at the moment, making it out of this. And we're still fighting on to try and have that land saved for an open space in a park, much as Williams Park in Eastbourne in 1914, the residents rose up against development. And if you ever go out to Williams Park now, you know what an asset it is to the whole of the Eastbourne and Hart Valley. Next speaker is going to be James Renwick. James, probably a lot of you have heard of James. You have quite a high profile, James, these days. James is Professor of Physical Geography at Te Wārangia Waka. He's also Commissioner at the Climate Change Commission and an expert on New Zealand's climate change, the effects on the whole of New Zealand, and is also an expert on what's happening around the coastal areas of Wellington. So James.
Oh, kia ora koutou, boy. This must be the biggest audience I've ever spoken to. Just about. So thanks for coming. And as you just heard, I was going to say a few words about climate change and how that affects a site like Shelley Bay. And I think there's been plenty in the news lately about climate change, both because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put out the final part of its 6th assessment report just this week. And of course, a few weeks ago we had ex-tropical cyclone Gabrielle, which did deliver a bit of wind and rain to Wellington, but nothing like what was seen further north. So we dodged a bit of a bullet there. But we do know already that something like 30% of the rain that fell out of that storm happened because the atmosphere is warmer now, there's more moisture in the air and so on, and the storms become more intense and certainly wetter as time goes on. And that's one of the big issues with Shelley Bay. And actually, a lot of what I wanted to say is printed in this document. If you can get hold of a copy, my colleague Rewi Newnham published a very nice article on stuff.co.nz a few weeks ago talking about all of this. And yeah, what he pointed out was that the landform and the land cover in the region of the peninsula and around Shelley Bay is not too different to what you see in places like Karekare and Piha off the west coast from Auckland, where the damage from the cyclone was pretty extensive. There were really big slips, a lot of houses were destroyed, and then tragically there was a loss of life both there and on the east coast of the North Island. So the point of that is to say, you know, when the next big storm comes along, it's quite likely there will be very heavy rain in the Wellington region, and quite likely there will be slips on the hillsides above Shelley Bay, so there's a real hazard there in terms of damage to infrastructure and potential harm for people living in that area. So that's one thing to be concerned about, and as time goes on, unless we get on top of emissions of greenhouse gases and actually shut down the problem, which we can do, but there's not much sign of it yet, those rainfall events on average are just going to get worse and worse. And it's, I think as Rewi said in his article, it's not a matter of if, it's when. You know, it may not be for another couple of decades, but you can pretty much guarantee there'll be a big storm that will affect this city in our lifetimes, and Shelley Bay will be right in the firing line, I think. And of course, the other concern with climate change is most of the heat that is being added to the climate systems is going into the oceans. So the ocean water's expanding, that's raising sea levels. Ice is melting from glaciers and ice sheets, that's adding water to the oceans, that's also raising sea levels. So over time, the coastline's going to come inland, and the proposed development at Shelley Bay is pretty much right at the coast. So again, it's a bit like the increase in intensity of storms. How bad it gets depends on how quickly we reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. But we know that there'll be, this century, at least half a metre of sea level rise on the global average, and up to a metre if we take, well, if we increase emissions from where they are now. The top end of the scenarios that were considered in the latest IPCC report give you 1 metre of sea level rise globally by the end of the century. And on top of that, if the West Antarctic ice sheet is more sensitive than we think it is, that could start melting more quickly, and that could add nearly another metre on top. So we could, with low probability, but it's possible we could have up to nearly 2 metres of sea level rise by the end of the century. But you know, that aside, even half a metre would be a big problem, especially because we now know too that some very good research done at Victoria University and GNS mapped the vertical movement of the land around the country. And if you go to the Sea Rise website, you can have a look at the Wellington Harbour region and see that places around the peninsula, especially Shelley Bay, or not especially, but typically Shelley Bay, the land is sinking by nearly 4 millimetres per year at the moment, and that's about the same rate as at which the sea level is rising in Wellington Harbour. So you get a doubling of the local rate of sea level rise in the Wellington area, which would mean that by the middle of the century we'd be looking at on the order of 60 centimetres plus or minus of sea level rise for Shelley Bay. And the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment a few years ago published a report talking about the effects of this kind of thing, and demonstrated that that sort of level of sea level rise for Shelley Bay, for Wellington, would change the occurrence of the 1 in 100 year coastal flooding event to be something that's happening more than once a year. In fact, towards the upper end of the range of what could happen, factoring in the sinking of the land in the harbour, we could be looking at these kind of events happening more like on a monthly basis instead of once in 100 years. And that's without factoring in a massive storm like we saw with Gabrielle. So the risks or the hazards that are going to be present around the coast, and it's not just Shelley Bay, but consider the road access all around the peninsula, those are going to come under threat more and more often in the future. And I think it's really, in my mind, it just doesn't look viable to try and build a big settlement right by the seashore in a place where the access is on a road that goes very close to current sea level around the coast. So in my mind, climate change is really weighting the dice more and more as time goes on against building lots of properties, putting a lot of people in houses right by the coast in Shelley Bay. So I think it's a much better idea to have that area made into a natural reserve. Allow people to visit, of course, but I think anyone who buys a property in Shelley Bay, if this building goes ahead, they're going to be in big trouble, and you know, insurance companies might be looking sideways at them pretty quickly. So I don't think it's going to be a happy experience for anyone who actually goes to live there. Yeah, and that was really all I wanted to say. So,
Thank you very much, James. I think you've said it all. It's about, you know, the craziness of building in Shelley Bay. We all want more housing in Wellington, no doubt about it. And there are much better sites to build than at Shelley Bay. I'd like to now call on members of Mo Whenua to come and speak. Mo Whenua is members of the Taranaki Whānui who have implacably opposed the sale of the land at Shelley Bay before development. They held an 18-month occupation there. They're taking the case to the Maori Land Court, and they have just consistently opposed what's going on, and I think it's really important to hear what they have to say.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Kenny Jean. With me is Josh Parata. We're both mo whenua, we're both Taranaki uri. We both live on this whenua, this extraordinary peninsula that is Motu Karangi. Being mana whenua is where we have a responsibility to protect the mana of that whenua. So you'll hear the mana whenua all over the place, all through the news. What does that mean? So we have the responsibility sits on our shoulders, sometimes quite heavily. I want to thank the organisers who brought this community together. We're a bit of a mosaic of people. I think we've all been drawn to this take, this issue, for different reasons. And I think I'm pretty sure that we're all united in one thing, and that is to stop the developments as they are in Shelley Bay and across Mātai Moana, in fact, our whole peninsula. Mo Whenua absolutely supports